All right. Hey, everyone. This is Megan Caper, and welcome to my chat this week with Lisa Murray. I'm really excited to get to know Lisa only because her hair matches her painting behind her, and I want to know how that happened. I'm fascinated. Um, so, welcome, Lisa.
Hi.
It's like your favorite colors, like your painting and your hair and your clothing. It's like
Well,
all this.
yeah, it's
I
all
love it.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, because my hair, I've been trying to get it this color for so long.
Yeah.
And two haircuts ago, my hairdresser finally got the color. And I'm like, yes, at last. Because for years, because he's been my hairdresser since I was like 25. And I love and adore him. But it's this thing where he was like, are you sure you want that red? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah,
And
totally. I
so,
have the same thing. I always am telling my hairdresser to make my hair bigger. I don't know why. I want to look like
yeah,
much like a Muppet as I possibly, like a
yeah.
human Muppet as I possibly
Yeah.
can. And I'm always like, no, bigger. And they're like, really? And I'm like, no, I want to look weird. I don't know. There's this thing, right? Like some of us just want to look weird.
I think it's the joy of expression, actually. It's
Yes,
like it's a
creativity.
way of, yeah, of physically expressing, an energy that you are. Yeah.
Totally. All right. So what
Yeah.
other ways do you creatively express who you are? What are some of the
Yeah.
fun
Well,
ways?
of course, painting, right?
Oh, is that
So
you did that
yeah,
painting?
yeah, they're my paintings, yeah.
Oh,
And
wow.
like I love color. Like I'm quite obsessed with color in a general sense. And yeah, and it's funny, a friend taught me how to do, they're alcohol inks, those ones, and she taught
Oh,
me how to do it
interesting.
on like tiny little pieces, and I was like, no, I want to do big ones. So of course I went out and bought all the stuff, and I've been playing ever since. Yeah, so look, I love lots of things. I'm very multi-creative, and yeah, there's so many things. So
Yeah, tell
I
me
like
about some of them.
stuff.
Like, so what are
All
some of
right,
the things that
excellent.
like in life just so painting, obviously. I
Yeah,
love those.
painting's
That
really fun.
painting to me reminds me of like nebula, like out
Yeah.
and
Well, all my paintings, I don't have any of the other sort nearby. I've got another sort too that's also a very intuitive, very flowing
yeah.
kind of technique. And what I notice with those ones is there's a lot of energy in them. And they're quite transformative for people when they see them at times.
Yeah.
So I really love just being in the zone of, like, if ever I can't get something to work or I just don't know what to do next, I just go and paint, because basically it
Oh,
just
that's so
kind of takes
interesting.
away all the mind stuff. And it's like, that I think there's something about the engagement with color that it's to me, it's almost like healing in a
Yeah.
way, really. And so I do an hour or even half an hour of painting, and I'm a new person.
So
So it's
interesting.
really cool.
Do you
Yeah.
do you feel
um
like it's like, are you channeling something into the painting? Like, is it your energy or
it's
are
not
you
a
like,
conscious thing.
right?
I think it's literally my hands in the universe.
Yeah, that's what I was
um
picking up, that you're like,
yeah,
this is almost a way that you sort of channel like
yeah, it is. Yeah,
another
because
part of consciousness. I mean, we're all part of the larger consciousness, right?
yes,
But
yeah, yeah,
it's sort
yeah,
of,
totally.
I feel like as humans, sometimes we get in our own way, right? Because we
Mm.
get attached to this idea like, oh, I'm this body and I'm this identity. And like, my name is Megan and I live in California, right? And all of this stuff. Oh, can you hear me? Zoom is giving me a
Yeah, yeah,
message.
it just went a little, yeah,
A little
hazy for a
wonky.
second. You're
Okay.
good.
So
Yeah.
to everyone, I'm recording this on Zoom in the height of probably, you know, 75% of the 7 billion people on this planet using Zoom right now. So if there's any glitchiness or whatever, I apologize. Please hang with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, sort of we get in the way because we have all of our fears and hopes and dreams and whatever, and we forget that sometimes we're part of this larger thing. And if we can get out of our own
Yeah.
way, and I think this is what creative things like painting and writing and music are
Yeah.
lovely for, is if we can
Yeah.
remove our ego for 30 or 60 minutes. Again, like you said, it's this like reset button, because I think
Yeah.
we remember who we really are, right? We
Oh,
remember that we're,
totally.
you know, like part of
Totally.
this larger creative, I mean, whatever you want to call it, divine, universal
Yeah.
consciousness, whatever, it is a creative
Mm.
force and it's an abundant
Mm.
force, right?
Mm. Mm.
And so if we can sort of
Mm.
get out of our
Yeah.
own way, that comes through and you get beautiful things like the painting behind you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was a little bit of a control freak. And when I say was, I probably still am.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here.
Let's not be kidding
Guilty.
anyone.
Guilty.
But I'm better than I used to be. And what I notice is when you do these kinds of paintings, you can't control it, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
so that also for me is a really useful way of, when I'm really like in my head and just being an idiot, basically, it's a really useful way of just going, okay, let's just go and play. And and I love to play, like I have all sorts of different ways of playing, but it's like this thing of, well, you go and play and then you see what emerges,
Yeah.
you know and so that's, yeah, I think it's a really valuable skill that many of us have kind of forgotten.
Yeah, I was going to say, can
Like,
we talk about play? Because so I used to work
yeah, let
as a pediatric occupational therapist, and occupational
ah
therapy, the word occupation in there comes from like what occupies your time. So it's not necessarily
yes,
job, right? That's one thing that could
yeah,
occupy your time, but it could
yeah,
also
yeah,
be, cooking or getting dressed or any sort of hobbies you have. Those are all our occupations, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But when you're working with kids, especially little kids, their main occupation is play. It's like
I
in the
know,
literature, like,
great,
one of the things you're
yeah,
helping them with is play. And for a kid with a
yeah,
disability or, with who's not neurotypical, like a kid with autism or
mm,
something, that is
yeah,
something you could actually, an occupation you help them with. And then, but there's nothing in the literature for adults about play. We call it like
yeah.
leisure time or something. But to me, that makes me think of like, I don't know, someone in a
Well,
beach
people
chair
take
drinks sipping a
yeah,
margarita or
convenience.
something. It's not
Yeah,
play.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah. They take it to like, oh, I'll watch TV, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Like, and it's interesting because, it's the zoning out thing. Like, I think play is so important for being able to just like let go of the thinking. To me, it's
mhm.
like, and I think people use TV to let go of their thinking, but they could be also doing all these really much more creative, kind of ways of having that same experience that would actually probably feed their being, their soul, whatever you want to call it, in such a much more generative way.
Yeah, exactly. I think that I think it's natural for us to need to turn off that sort of problem solving, forward
Mm,
thinking part of our
yes,
brain sometimes.
yes, definitely.
But there are options. And I think that sometimes watching TV or playing a little game on my tablet or whatever is fine,
Yeah,
especially if
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
stressed and I really do need to
yeah.
just check out, right?
Oh yeah,
But for
definitely.
those
Yeah,
times like when I'm just like, ugh, I just can't work anymore. Yeah, I found that sometimes if I choose something that's more play like, right, that's or more
yeah,
creative,
yeah,
um, yeah, it rejuvenates me in a way that, getting on my phone and scrolling through Twitter does not, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, so yeah, I'm trying to remember. I heard a really interesting definition of play at one point, and it was something like an activity that you do, like it was like just for the pleasure of it or just for the joy of it.
Yeah,
Like the purpose
yeah,
of it
yeah,
is the joy and the pleasure.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, this is so funny because I look at life as that. I'm like, life should be for the pleasure of it,
yeah.
and not necessarily the go out and get drunk. I mean, you can do that if you want to, of course, but for me, it's like we take so little time for pleasure, you
Mm,
know, and like about, I don't know, 12 years ago, I had burnout, like really, really severe burnout, like couldn't put a coherent sentence together kind of burnout.
wow.
And I remember going to, and I wasn't getting better. Like I'd left my job and I was just, my physical body was really a mess.
Did you leave your
And
job because of the burnout? Was that like
oh
part of
yeah,
one of what
I
you were
couldn't
things you were trying to do?
stay upright. I
Got
literally
it.
couldn't stay upright. I
Okay.
was, what day is it? Where am I? I would just look
Mm,
at people. I couldn't comprehend anything. I'd really done some bit damage in the brain cells, I think, at that time. Anyway, I remember going to see this like life direction psychic because I was like, I clearly can't go back and do that anymore.
right.
And she said to me, well, you're going to have to get creative. Now, when I was a kid, I was really creative
Hmm.
and really playful. And then, of course, as you get to be an adult, you get very serious about everything. And I was a very type A, overachiever driven kind of personality. And I remember she said to me, make a list of ways to be creative. And I can't remember the exact amount, but maybe I had 3 things on the list the first time I made the list. And I was like, it's pretty sad, really, you know?
Mm,
And I ended up getting a list of about 50 things because I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is not how I want to spend my life, you
hmm.
know? So, and of course, and many more things have emerged over the years as well. So, Yeah, I think it's just sometimes we need those really simple little prompts to allow us to go, oh yeah, that's what I could do right now, you know? Because
Yeah, because we're not encouraged as adults to have
no,
playful things to do, you
no.
know?
What do you do for play?
I'm very crafty.
Oh yeah.
So like I especially love like sort of any kind of like yarn or thread type of craft. So sewing or
Mm-hmm.
embroidery. I actually just so for those of you that aren't watching this as we're filming it, we're in the middle
Yeah.
of the pandemic right now, and I'm in California and
Yes.
we're in a shelter in place order right now. So we're not allowed to leave our
Mm,
house unless it's
mm,
for going to the market or the doctor or something. So I just ordered a bunch of stuff to teach myself how to do cross stitch because it's like one of the,
yeah.
and so I love doing stuff like that. It's exactly what you're talking about with the painting. There's no pressure, right? It's just
Mm,
creative, you
yeah.
know,
It's
but it's engaging.
yeah.
You know,
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
there's something about not having an outcome.
yeah,
Like lots of the things I've run over the years, I've said to people, "Do not to focus on the outcome," because everyone is focused on the outcomes,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And and I've noticed that every time I get stuck, if I go, okay, I'm just going to do something, doesn't matter what actually, where I'm not focused on an outcome. So you
yeah,
take all that pressure off. It actually, then you get engaged in the process, right? And the
right,
process has its own gifts, but we're taught to go from A to B the fastest possible,
right,
like
yeah,
crazy, crazy. And it's so interesting that we are in the midst of the pandemic and that, of course, people can't go from A to B the fastest way
hmm,
possible right now. Like, and I think even though it doesn't feel like it, I guess for many people, I think there's a gift in this for all of us.
yeah. I've been receiving messages for weeks, even before everyone sort of had to stay home or whatever, that what this part of what this is about is a time for us to, it's like working on the basement and the foundation of the building, like not
Mm.
anything necessarily that anyone's going to see,
Yes,
but
yes.
going back and working on and sort of looking at those more foundational things of like, yeah, why am I doing this, which doesn't have
Yeah.
a goal. I think having a goal is lovely, but I also think it can be dangerous to be too attached to like, and
Mm.
I need it to look like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like knowing which direction you're heading in, to me that's
Yeah.
more like a part of the spiritual process, right?
Yeah.
But how I get
Definitely.
there, or whether it looks exactly like what I wanted it to look like when I get there, it's been
Mm.
such a relief to let go of that stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And just be
totally.
like, I know that I'm supposed to point my boat in this direction.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
kind of all that's important, is that I'm pointing my boat in a direction that I, like you said, going back to that stuff that as kids was meaningful
Yeah.
to us, or just heading towards that stuff that brings us joy and satisfaction, whatever that is, right? How you
Mm.
get there, or what comes up as you are on your path, or, all of that stuff, I feel like is like, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And the more,
It doesn't. I'm so
yeah,
with you on
let it
that. Like,
go,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's funny because the more I've like played with all of this kind of stuff, because I love the energy of the unknown and adventures and all of that kind of stuff. I really love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And the more I've played with it, the more I realize absolutely all our achievements as such, they're wonderful for our minds and they actually don't matter. We're going to
Yeah.
get where we're going anyway. And
Yes.
sometimes in not getting what we thought we wanted, we get something much more exciting. Like, can I tell you a story?
Please.
Yeah. So, quite a few years ago, I was in Sweden and I was supposed to be running this event in the south of Sweden. And literally, I sent this message to the lady who was hosting it and promoting it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get on the train in the morning. I think I'll be there at X time. She writes back going, oh, no, it's cancelled. I'm like, what? Like, my event that she had told me was cancelled. And it turns out she hadn't really told me the truth about how many people were coming and what was going on. And she was burnt out. And so she just cancelled it. Like, and I was like, what am I going to do now? And
Yeah.
so I called another friend who lived in Sweden, and I said, weirdest thing just happened, and I've got 4 days now, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And she said, come and have dinner. Let's talk about it. Anyway, we ended up that night going to her boyfriend's farm, and I didn't realize, but he owned a really big, like a lot of horses. He is big into horses. There were 30 foals there. And we got to go play with them the next day.
Oh.
And I tell you, I felt like a foal. It was just, it was so fun.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting though, was in the afternoon I was writing, because I'm, one of my things is writing. I wrote from a totally different space because they'd cleared my mind.
Yeah.
And so I was like direct to the energy at a level that, and so now I go horse riding. Other people go horse riding and I go horse riding. And
I
people are
love
like,
that.
you do what?
I love that.
Well, it's awesome because the horses, they are all about the play, and all about the joy. And and same deal, we try and fit them into this box of, I'm going to teach you these things and you're going to get really good at them so I can, show you. And yet there's this other energy of them where, wild horses, where they're beautiful and they show us things.
That makes me think of two things. One, sort of, I love that you said that you get excited about the unknown or adventures. I think that a lot of people get stopped by the unknown because it's scary, right? Our brains are designed, our nervous systems are designed to calm down when we know what's going to happen. That is why we all have calendars and to-do lists, right? If I woke up every day and had no idea what clients I was seeing or what I was doing and had to like piece it together, like my nervous system would get triggered, right? So there's stuff, but when it comes to sort of those bigger life things, I think that if, again, we can get out of our human bodies and our human brains and our human nervous systems and realize that, and just have trust that there are these energies we're part of that we can't necessarily perceive, but that it's going to work out, again, as long as we're sort of heading in the right direction, that this is all going to work out for us, right? Like that pronoia thing that you believe that the universe is conspiring for your greatest good, right?
Totally.
So that's one thing that made me think of is, your event got canceled. You could have gone into this place of like, oh my God, where this money that I was supposed to make, and now I'm in Sweden, and what am I going to do? And blah, blah, blah. But you just sort of trusted that like, this should work out, and it did. And then the other thing that I love that you were talking about is thinking about, teaching the horses, and this is the relationship we're supposed to have. That reminded me of how important it is to have a beginner's mind always, to not put these boxes and labels on things as much as we can. I mean, again, that's how we make sense of the world, right? Is by putting things in different boxes and labeling them and sorting them, right? But how important it is sometimes to remember to forget that. Right?
Totally.
And just let things happen in a new way.
The labels and the boxes are changing, and if we desperately hold on to the old ones and as if they are how it is, we're gonna miss the new. And I can tell you a fun story about a horse actually that really showed me that. I learned to ride from a 93-year-old man, and he had 4 horses, and the biggest one was the one he put me on. He said, I don't really have any beginners horses, he said, but you'll be right on that one. I was like, okay, because I'm pretty like, I'll try anything once.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, there was this white horse there though, that every time I would feed the horses carrots, this white horse was like throwing itself at me over the fence. And I was always saying to Frank, oh, can I ride that one? He's like, no, definitely not. That horse bucks people off. You cannot get on that horse. And I was just like, there's something going on here. I know there's something different here. Anyway, one day I looked at the horse and I'm like, do I know you? And it's pretty much like, and like some people I know will think you talk to horses. I'm like, oh yeah, I talk to everything,
I talk to everything too.
Yeah, exactly. And it was really interesting because he gave me the film of every lifetime I'd ever known him.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, it was amazing. I was just like so honored almost, And then I had just had this feeling, and I said to Frank, okay, I said, I know you won't let me ride him, but can I groom him? Because I knew that if I got him in the round yard, I'd get there, Anyway, so I used to groom him, and he was so well behaved for me. He was just a beauty. He literally, did everything for me that he would not do for anybody else. And then I said to Frank, can I get on him bareback? Like, because I just wanted to lie on him.
Yeah.
And Frank's like, I don't know about that. Anyway, eventually he let me, and he told me how to get him used to that. And he let me be on him bareback, and I ended up riding him, and I never came off him twice. And it was not his fault. And both times he was straight back to get me, you know?
Oh.
Yeah. And so the thing is, you could put anything in a box. Now, to everyone else, that was a dangerous horse who was bucking people off,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Here I was, a very beginner rider, and I mean, very beginner. I'm still very beginner, and yet the connection created this totally different possibility.
That reminds me so much of how we do that to humans too. Like if,
Mm,
like I'm thinking again, I don't know why this keeps coming up in this conversation, but when I used to work as an occupational therapist and would work with these children with very severe behavior problems, and they would get labeled
yeah,
as like the problem child in
yeah,
the class,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And my view on behavior is that it's a communication tool, and it's a communication
Mm,
tool you use when you don't have other effective ways of getting your point across.
mm.
So I
Yeah,
have a
I think
need
that's
and I
very
don't
true.
have the words or any other tools to let you know. So I'm going to do something that makes this activity stop because I don't want to be doing
Yeah,
this anymore. And if I throw a big
yeah,
enough tantrum, you pull me out of the classroom and then I don't have to do it anymore, right?
yep.
Goal reached, right? Like I now no
Brilliant,
longer have to do
absolutely
this thing,
brilliant.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so for me, it was always like, well, we have to give this person other tools
Yeah,
to communicate what it is they need. And I think that's so true too of even just adults that we pigeonhole as like, oh, they're difficult or they're this or they're that, or oh, I hate my boss. They're such a
yeah,
whatever hard ass or something.
yeah, yeah,
It's just like that horse, you and that horse, it's
yeah,
always about that connection. And like,
yeah.
how is that person not feeling connected either to
Mm,
themselves or to others or to divine?
yeah,
And how can I, as a human being, help them feel that safety and that security and that love that comes from connection, right? Because
yeah,
everyone desires that. There's not a
yeah,
single being on this planet, human, animal, otherwise, that doesn't want to feel that love and that connection and that acceptance, right?
yeah.
And so I think that's, yeah, so interesting. We tend to like put these people in boxes, but if you really stop and ask yourself, how is this person looking for connection and not getting it? Because then that's when
Mm,
behaviors come up, whether that's with kids or adults or
yeah,
animals or whatever, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Although
how
I'm
is
going
that?
to
How can I
say,
help facilitate that?
for me as a wild introvert, sometimes it's like, get away from me too
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
So there's also that
But
where
that's
it's
like you
just
need that
like,
connection with self time, right? Because
yes,
as I'm
totally,
also an introvert and I'm
totally.
an empath. So sometimes when I'm around
Yeah.
other people, it's too much of that connection with others. And I need that time to connect
Mm,
with myself again. Like we all need that
mm.
balance of all of those, right?
Yes, yes.
Like connection with divine, there are some people that are perfectly happy living in a hut on the side of a mountain in Tibet, meditating all day long. And it's just
Yeah,
connection with divine all day long.
yeah,
I
yeah.
couldn't do that. You know what I
No,
mean? Like, so I
no.
think that we all each have our own sort of like
Different levels.
profile of like what, like a
Yeah.
sensory profile of like what we need in terms of connection. Um, yeah, that's a good point too, that sometimes it can be overwhelmed.
Yeah. Oh, look, totally. Like, because I, again, say I'm very empathic, and really, everyone in my family used to call me oversensitive.
Mm.
And it wasn't probably till I was about 40 that I corrected them to super aware, you know,
Oh,
because I was
interesting.
just like,
Yeah.
I suddenly realized that actually it was the awareness, and I didn't have tools to deal with the awareness.
Yeah.
And once I got the tools to deal with the awareness, I wasn't highly sensitive. Well, I'm still aware, right? Totally aware, but
Right.
I'm not overreacting. I'm not responding back anymore in those ways. And it
Right.
was such a wonderful thing for me, absolutely changed my life, because I couldn't have done all the traveling and so many different things if I hadn't sorted that bit
Yeah.
out. So
So I'm just
yeah.
curious because this is a question that comes up with people I work with a lot, and I got the same thing as a kid. I got don't be so emotional, which is
Yeah,
similar,
same
right?
thing. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
curious for you, like what are some of the tools? Because I know there's a lot of people
Oh,
out there that are
yeah.
empaths and just feel drained all the time, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
that it's the empathic thing that's making them that way, and they don't have the tools. So I'm just curious for
Yeah.
you,
I
partially just
think
for me to, because I'm always like
yeah, yeah,
wanting to know
sure,
other
yeah.
people's tools, and then
Okay.
also for other
So
people, like what are some of the tools you love?
yeah. Okay. So I think the first thing for me is really realizing that I was totally aware of the collective at all times. Right?
Mm.
Is this mine or does this belong to the collective? Because I had personalized absolutely everything
So
and
how do
thought
you
it
tell
was
the
all
difference?
mine. Hey, how do I tell the difference? Ask the question. For me, it's just intuitive. Okay, is this mine or is this happening in the collective? And one will feel lighter and more expansive than the other. Whichever one it is, that's the one it is.
Interesting.
And really, it's rarely ours. And I know that sounds weird in some ways, but when you're really highly aware, intuitive, empathic, whatever you would like to call it, there's not much separation there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the oneness is really in action.
Yeah.
And so what I've noticed is if I can acknowledge, oh, okay, it's not just me. So I don't have to go into the fight and flight. I don't have to go into all of the response mechanisms that I would if it was only me. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So that's probably my first thing. And that has helped a lot. And then what I realized is that you can ask your energy. Like my energy is really expanded out. Almost, well, I'm very multidimensional anyway, right? So all the galactic stuff is my fun place as well. And so, but my energy, I expand it out. So there's a lot of space between the molecules. Because, for example, all the judgment in the world, I used to take it really personally, like really,
Mm.
really personally, because I could feel it all. Like it was like coming at my body. And that
Mm-hmm.
would lead to the overwhelm, right? And so then I was like, oh, I'm aware of judgment, but it's not always as directed at me as it feels like,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that thing of putting a lot of space between the molecules, like literally just asking your energetic body to really be big, really,
Mm-hmm.
really, really
Mm-hmm.
big. What happens is all that stuff passes through and you don't have to actually feel it as
Mm.
much.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And it
love
doesn't
that.
mean you have less awareness. It actually, interestingly, like, do you know how horses have a zone of awareness? Do you know that?
Mm-mm. No, tell me more. I
Oh,
don't know
so
much about
horses.
horses, so tell me more.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, horses are herd animals, right? And they're also they're prey. They're preyed upon, as in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their awareness is almost 360 degrees. They can almost see 360 degrees. So you never want to stand exactly in front of a horse because that's the one place they can't see. And
Mm.
you'll notice they'll always move so they can see you. And so they expand their energetic awareness out, like depending on whether it's an alpha mare, the stallion, the whatever, where they are in the herd, a long way. So they can be aware of any predators that may be coming.
Mm.
And so, in essence, it's a very similar thing for us. If we expand our awareness out, we're going to know if there's something 3 streets away we don't want to be involved in. We're just going to take a different route.
Right. Yeah.
And so, a lot of that really intense kind of stuff where you're aware of everything and you feel like you're going to die, well, that was
Yeah.
me anyway,
Yeah.
it goes away. So, that's
Yeah.
probably the first thing, or the first and second things that for me were very, very helpful. And then I think, is this relevant to me is another question that I asked a lot, because even if someone is judging you, that's just their judgment. It's theirs, it's not yours.
When I realized that 98% of what people thought about me had everything to do with them and absolutely nothing to do with me, it was how they
Yeah.
were seeing me through their filters,
Yes,
what the world was
exactly.
like to them, right?
Yeah.
It was so freeing.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying I'm not responsible sometimes for like doing things that are, like I'm not shirking my,
No, 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 I get that.
agency
Yeah, yeah.
in, people
No.
in my life and my relationship with
Yeah.
them. But most of it has to do with them and their drama and
Yeah.
what they're going through and, has
Yeah.
very little to do with me. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I
yeah.
found I actually worked that out because I would go overseas and I would notice that I felt like a different person.
Yeah.
Like, and what I realized is the distance diminished the intensity of all that energy that was coming at me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Travel
And
is, to me, has been so therapeutic on so
yeah.
many different levels and so educational, and not just in
Yes.
the way you would think of, like, oh, it's educational because I go to Paris and I go to the
Yeah.
museums and I learn about this
Yeah.
art or
Yeah.
this architecture, right? But educational in everything that we're in on a daily basis becomes normalized to us.
Yeah.
And if you can get yourself into a situation or a culture where it's done even slightly differently, you notice it so much more. You're like, that's weird, right? Like I was
Yeah.
just thinking the other day
Yeah.
of in the Netherlands that nobody has blinds on their windows, right? So there's all these
Yeah, I
like
know.
ground floor apartments that you're walking by, and you can just
Yeah,
see and as an
yeah,
American, we're all into like our privacy and our independence, and right. And so it was so odd to me, and my thought was, oh my God, aren't those people embarrassed at everyone watching them? And then I'm like, well, of course not. Like, of course they're
no,
not, right? That's part of the thing.
no,
And so realizing that even these things like shame are optional
yeah,
and
yeah,
cultural,
yeah, yeah.
that can make a
Oh,
huge difference too. Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like every time I travel, do you ever do like the adventure of just asking your body to go left or right and seeing where you walk?
Yeah, totally. I do that
Yeah,
all the time. When I'm driving,
yeah,
and my intuition will be like, "Go left," and I'll be like,
yeah,
"Okay," like,
yeah, yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Like in so many cities, like that's how, or not even cities, sometimes even in the country, I
Yeah,
just do the left right thing or straight ahead, as the case may be. And it's always amazing what you discover.
yeah,
And I think that's part of the unknown that we were talking about earlier as well, where
yeah.
when we trust ourselves, because, those being able to manage my sort of empathetic responses, um, that then led me to be able to trust myself.
Mm,
And so then I could have the adventures. And I think a lot of the time when people don't want to go the unknown and the adventures, it's because they don't have this inner trust that,
yeah,
oh, I'm going to be okay no matter what.
right. Yeah, that feeling of safety, like I'm going to be okay no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah.
That
Because
feeling
I've
of
walked around,
security and safety. Yeah,
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 so many cities. And like I've been wildly lost. I've been in the midst of Berlin and had people offering me cocaine and all sorts of things. You just go, uh-huh. But I've also known when not to walk down the street and
hmm,
when to do something totally different that day. When the London bombings were on all those years ago, I was in the UK and I was supposed to go to London that day, and in fact to one of those train stations. And because I was on my way to Paris, and I wanted to go on the underground train to Paris,
hmm,
and I'd been trying to book it for 3 days, and it would not book. And I was
hmm,
like, well, this is weird, and it just wouldn't book. And anyway, I was sitting in someone's office, and they said, are you going to London today? I said, yeah. They said, well, I don't think you are. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they told me. And I was just like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
I've been so looked after.
yeah,
And so I feel like we have these moments in our life where we start to realize, oh, actually, I do know, and it's when we slow down enough to listen. And if I hadn't been so obsessed with the train thing, then I would have known days before that I was going to do this a different way. But I was
right.
obsessed with it. And
Yeah.
I think our obsessions sometimes work against us as well, you know?
We're trained to solve problems by thinking them through, not by
Yeah.
listening to our intuition. Like all of our
Yeah.
schooling and everything trains us, here's how you do a
Yeah.
math problem,
Totally.
right? You think it through. You do step one, step two. Even like if you're going to write an essay, here's the 5 paragraph format, for writing
Yeah.
an essay, right?
Yeah.
We're not taught to instead just trust that the answer is already there, maybe not
Yeah.
inside us yet, but inside this
Yeah.
field we're connected to for sure,
Yeah.
right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and to just stop and listen. And personally, I like using both forms
Yeah.
of,
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
answers. I
Well,
think
they're
they're,
they're useful for different things. Useful for different things.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
think that, one of the things that I think, is going to happen, especially as the world is changing because of this pandemic and because
Mm,
of people having to stay at home and do their lives differently, is some of the playbooks are getting thrown out. Those boxes, those labels,
yeah,
right, aren't
yeah,
don't apply anymore, right? We have to do things different
yeah,
ways. And when you have to do something a different way, it opens the door to the possibility of invention, of creativity, of play, right? Which gets back to what we were talking about
yeah,
earlier. And I think
yeah, yeah,
we can
totally.
each do it on an individual basis, but we're doing it as a society and a culture right now because of necessity, right? Necessity is the mother of
Hmm.
invention, right? But
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, it's again, that's why I'm really feeling this strong pull that now is the time to sort of rebuild those foundations, because it might look totally
yeah.
different than it did before. um
I'm sure it does.
yeah,
Because I think, I tend to be a bit of a futurist. So I feel like I had my wake up call was back with the burnout. And I have been building these different foundations, for a long time now.
yeah,
And I think, we we could have an incredibly wonderful new world if people are willing to let go of the old one.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes such a tricky thing because, like, and I know I've watched myself also, like, but I liked it this way. And it's funny because if you'd asked me before I left my job, like before I had the burnout, did I have a great life? I would have been like, my life is fantastic. And I look back now, I'm like, my life was shit.
Right.
Because literally what I have now is so much better. But you can't see that when you've already decided what you've got is fantastic.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, and I think that, again, going back to what you said before, the way to discover those new things is through creativity and play, right? Because
Yeah.
if we haven't
Yeah.
conceived of it yet, if we don't even have the idea yet, we can't make it a goal. We can't work towards it, right? And so there's this whole stage of, digging in the dirt and discovering what's there. And then once we're like, oh, that's, I never even thought of that it could be that way, right? Then we can start sort of heading in that direction. And I think, for me, I get that through a combination of like, sort of exploring myself. And again, what are my, people are always asking like, what am I supposed to do in life? Why am I here? Those sort of big questions. And to me, it's like, where does your compass point? What direction do you naturally want to head in? What were you interested in as a kid? What are the things now that are those like weird things that you just can't stop reading about, right? Like, that you'll always read an article when you find it on whatever, Treasure
Curiosity
or something, right? Whatever, what's that weird thing that you're just obsessed with, right? And I think those are sort of those markers of where we're supposed to go. And I think we can figure that out through a combination of, like looking inward, but also, looking, this is why it's so important. And I think why we have all these senses, why we have eyes and ears and whatever, is because we can get it from the external world too. We can get that inspiration from like looking at what other people are doing and being like, oh, that's so cool. I don't want to be exactly that person, but I love that aspect of what they're doing. And, how could I bring that into my own life?
Oh, look, curiosity, I think, is this marvelous, like, everyone, it's easy to be curious. You just have to be interested in the world. And I think
oh, you're cutting out. Hold on. Sorry. You still there?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but the audio's gone all wonky. Hello. Welcome to Zoom being overloaded. Okay, you're back. You sound normal.
Better? Okay,
you sounded
good.
like a robot on acid for a second.
Oh, yeah.
But it's all good.
Yeah. So I remember my mum coming home from parent-teacher interviews one time and she's like, everything was good except that your teacher said you asked too many questions. And I'm like, how can that be? But of course I asked the questions that they didn't know how to answer.
Right, yeah.
So I was always really naturally curious. And I think that, I didn't make myself wrong for that. That was probably one of the few times back then when I didn't, but it's this thing where a lot of that curiosity has been sort of trained out of us. But when we start to go, well, what is it I really, truly desire to do with my life? Then you bring back the curiosity. And all of a sudden, like, I would never have thought I could create art that was visually pleasing because I can't draw for nuts, like I'm terrible drawer. And so it was really interesting for me to discover, oh, I can express through color. So I think that for all those things we have a desire for, there's something about the energy of desire, like with horses, it started because I wanted to pat a horse. That's what all of that started from. And what came from that was truly absolutely magical, So I think sometimes we think we have to have this big thing that, and yet what I've noticed for myself is all these really little interesting things I have, it starts the tiniest thing, just a little tiny bit of curiosity or a tiny little desire that is actually quite so simple to fulfill. And it just, you keep taking more steps and then you get magic.
I think too, sort of what you said about like being able to create art, but you can't draw. Also making sure that if we are feeling drawn to something or we're feeling like a resonance with something or like I want to do that, that we don't let the fact that we can't do it in the traditional way stop us. Like that reminded me, I was just thinking like I am a terrible athlete. I
Yeah,
was
I hear
always
you.
very good in school with the academic subjects, but I was the last person picked for any team in physical
Yeah,
education
me
because
too.
I do not have very good gross motor skills at all. Terrible. Fine, whatever. And so I always sort of shied away from doing sports, especially team sports, because I didn't want to be like the weakest player on the team. That was embarrassing as a kid, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I do.
So I always sort of shied away from that, but I always, you know, wanted to find that thing. I knew that God, there's got to be something. And at one point, I ended up getting a week, it's sort of a long story, but I ended up getting this week trip to learn how to whitewater kayak. Turns out I'm an exceptional whitewater kayaker. But I never would have found it if I'd listened to my voice, because it was a free trip. If I'd listened to my voice that said, "Oh, you're not an athlete, you're going to be terrible at this, just like everything else," right? If I'd listened to
Mm-hmm.
that voice, I never would have gone, right? Because I would have been like,
Yeah,
"Oh gosh, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of more people that I can't do whatever, you know, athletic thing it
yeah,
was," right? Like I always
yeah,
used to
yeah.
joke that I'm really, really good at the sport of the exercise bike. I'm excellent. That was like the only thing I was good at because
Yeah,
that was
I'm good
it.
at walking.
Yeah. Even that, I trip
Yeah.
sometimes. Like, you know, um,
Yeah, yeah.
like don't ask me to jog. Seriously. Like I'm really not coordinated at all. But yeah, so it's so interesting. I think that making sure, and again, this comes back to that feeling of like that place of feeling trust and self-love and
Mm.
all of that, of just trusting, like, if I'm meant to do this, I'm going to find the way, whether it's doing the, you know, alcohol based paintings or whether it's finding that one sport that you're like, I can actually do this. Right.
Yeah.
Um, I think that it's, you know, again, getting out of our own way and getting out of that, you know, shame, things that we've been shamed
Yes.
about in the past. Um,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Can you
um,
imagine a world where like no one ever shamed anyone again? Just wouldn't it be so different?
I was talking to one of my meditation teachers, this is probably 20 years ago, and he, this brilliant guy, he's got like a PhD in astrophysics from the University of Chicago, and he's a monk. And he was at one point working with the Dalai Lama, translating some of his writings into English.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about, I think they were talking about Tonglen. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's basically, um, it's a forgiveness practice.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
um, he was talking to the Dalai Lama and he said something about, you know, what about, I mean, he said, what about, you know, sort of forgiving ourselves? And the Dalai Lama was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, in English, the word is guilt. Like, I feel guilty about something I did in the past, right? Or something I did to a person. And they sort of talked about it for a while, and there's no translation for the word guilty. He was sort of like, but that happened in the past, and now you learn your lesson, so you won't do that again, right? And he was like, well, yeah, but I still hold on to that feeling bad, right?
Oh, wow. There's
And
no word
there's
for
no,
that.
and
Amazing.
same
Yeah.
thing, sort of thing. I was like, oh my God, what if I grew up in a world where there was no concept of guilt? It was just like, well, yeah, I
Yeah.
messed up because I was learning and now I know better,
Yeah. Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like,
Absolutely. Oh,
um,
I love that. It's really
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
if there was no shame,
Yeah.
if it was like, well, that was an honest effort and I didn't do it as well as someone who's the best in the world at it, but
Yeah.
whatever. Like, if there was no shame
Yeah.
attached to that, if it was like, well, I tried,
Yeah. Yeah.
gave it my best shot,
Totally.
I'll do better next
Yeah.
time, or I'll choose not to do it next time, or whatever. But that there was no emotional like pushback involved on that. Wow,
Mm. Yeah.
that'd be a great world.
Pretty amazing.
All right,
Yeah.
next incarnation,
Absolutely.
I'm incarnating into the reality where shame isn't a thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a fun thing to ask for.
Oh my goodness. So,
Mm.
is there anything else that you sort of would want to share with
Anything
people,
else?
or like if
Oh,
there was a
let me think. Let
billboard
me
and
think.
you could like put a message up for the whole
A
world,
billboard.
what would you
Oh,
say?
yeah. Um, it's so funny. I think my world is just like, I think we need to all believe in magic again. Like, we need to really invite, like, my favorite book as a kid was The Magic Faraway Tree.
I haven't read that
And,
one. I'll have to.
oh, yeah, Enid Blyton.
Okay.
And it was just basically, they would climb this tree, and at the top, the clouds would bring all these different worlds, you know.
Oh.
Oh yeah. And I was obsessed with that book when I was a little kid. Like I was a big reader, but it was still one of my favorite books for a really long time. But in essence, it was the energy of magic, you know.
Mhm.
And I think we've made everything so linear and fitting into all the boxes. And yet what I think I love to do with people is really bring them back into that space where magic exists, you know.
Mm.
And there's so many ways to do that, and I think if we all allowed just a little bit more magic in our life, we wouldn't have to work so hard and we wouldn't have to try so hard, and we'd have a
Yeah.
lot more joy, you know.
Yeah. And just remembering that this reality is not as solid as we think it is. You know, we
Oh god, no.
experience it as being very concrete and
Yes,
solid. You know,
yes,
but even on a subatomic level, all matter, solid things are these subatomic particles vibrating at a particular frequency, and then we perceive them as matter. So just to remember, even
yeah.
science doesn't believe that matter is real, right? That we're
No,
constantly
no, no,
fluctuating between
correct.
energy and matter, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And to remember that, because I think it can be so easy
Mm,
to be fooled by our senses and fooled by our brains that are sense making machines, that's
mm,
their job, right?
yeah.
Into thinking that that all we can perceive and all we can see is all that is, and that's not true at all.
No, not at all.
Not at
Oh,
all.
look, like, you know, it's funny. I've got a group, um, well, it's a mystery school actually,
Ooh.
and yeah, I know, and that came as a total surprise too. That came from something out of really left field. I was not expecting to be offering a mystery school, and it came because an astrologer said to me, "You know that this is like everywhere in your chart." I'm like, "What?" Because I've never really had a lot of interest in astrology, but I just there was an energy. I was like, "Oh, I need to get something, you know, a
Yeah.
chart from her,"
Yeah.
and this is what came out of it. But one thing, I was talking to my group the other night, and I was saying how, you know, there's been times when I've been at the beach or in a room full of people, and I knew there were people there, but I couldn't see them because I
Mm.
was literally in another dimension.
Hmm.
And it took, you know, those things have happened, you know, some time ago, but it's all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's how it works. And I was like, wow, there's some magic that I didn't really realize, you know. And of course, sometimes when I've been traveling, there's been like time bleeds and all sorts of interesting things where I
Yeah.
can perceive all the multiple layers and, you know,
Yeah.
but it's like we hold on to this reality as if, you know, these things we've all agreed are true are the only things,
Right.
but they're not the only things. And
I
you
have
know,
a
like sometimes the dragons come to visit me and I'm like, hi. And
yeah.
so it's like, you know, there's all these other things that are not necessarily seen or known in the traditional ways, but they still exist.
I have a great sort of concrete example of that then you can sort of
Yeah.
extrapolate. I used to work at this science museum, kids science museum,
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, that'd be
and
fun.
they had this great exhibit where they had like a lens you could look through, and the lens, so we can only see certain spectrum of light, right? Like only certain
Mm,
vibrations can our
mm.
eyes and our brains interpret and make
Yep.
into an image, right?
Yep. Yep.
um, so one of the spectrums we can't see is UV light, ultraviolet light. So anything
Yes.
past violet on the spectrum, our eyes
Mm.
just don't make any sense of it. It just, we don't have the
Yeah.
receptors for it, right?
Yeah.
And so they had this exhibit where they had these, it sort of looked like microscopes, only they didn't make things larger. It was just a lens, but you could look through it
Mm-hmm.
and it translated UV light down the spectrum so that we could see it. So it sort of was like a, you know, I don't even know, like a device to help us see things we can't normally see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they had a whole mess of different flowers that you could put underneath this lens and look at.
Yeah.
And bees and other insects do see UV light. So
Yeah.
they can see a larger portion of the spectrum or a slightly different part of the spectrum than we can. And when you looked, so I would look at the flower and I'm like, oh, you know, there's a pretty red flower with a yellow middle. Great. And then I'd put it underneath this lens. So all of a sudden now I could see all the UV reflected off it. And there were these landing strips for the bees to get to where the nectar was. There were these little, they look like little airport little landing strips on each
Wow.
petal
Oh,
that
that's so
directed them
gorgeous.
towards where the pollen was. It was like little arrows, like come here, right? Like in those old motels that had the arrows that would flash, right?
My gosh.
Um, and I was like, oh my God, there's this whole world I didn't know about that is
Yeah.
directing bees and other insects to get this pollen. Whoa, you know, but it's a very similar
Yeah.
thing. There's all these
Yeah.
energies and these dimensions and these vibrations and these realities that just like we can't see UV light, it doesn't mean they're not there. And
Yeah, totally.
the more that you do sort of get in touch with your intuition, with this kind of thing, the more that you may not be able to see it as concretely, but you get a sense that something's there and you could sort of get some information from it, right? Or at least sort of have a little bit of communication with it. So I think it's for people that think that there isn't anything beyond our perception, right? That, oh, no, you just are born and then you live and then you die and then you go back to dirt, right? To think that like there's nothing out there beyond our perception. I'm like, look at a flower under a UV light. Because
I think that's a fantastic analogy or like suggestion. Because I've seen the videos or there's pictures or videos or something like that out on the internet, and I've seen them and I was like, oh, they're so beautiful, aren't they? And it's like, you know, we look at this world and we have our points of view about what it looks like, and yet what if there's this whole other level of beauty that we haven't seen yet, you know? So much magic.
So much magic. All right, I'm gonna end there with that phrase because so much magic. I love it. I love it.
So much magic.
Lisa, if people want to know more about you, where in this world can they find you?
If you go to my website, lisamurray.co, you'll find all kinds of magical things.
Awesome. So if you guys want to know more about Lisa, feel free to go visit her website. If you want to know more about me, you can come see my website, which is also just my name, megancaper.com. I have an extra M than you do, but
you have an M.
I have an M.
Lucky you. M for magic.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I love talking with other intuitive woo-woo people and sort of exploring these, like the unseen things, the magic, and how to get more of that in your life and how to work with that. I think that that's fascinating. So I appreciate your time and thank you so much for coming on with me today. All right.
Thank you. It's been fun.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.